The shocking truth behind the social media ban that tech giants are trying to hide from you. In recent months, the debate over the social media ban has taken over the news and legislative corridors in various American states, from Utah to Florida. The official justification seems noble and unquestionable: protecting the mental health of children and teenagers against the dangers of addiction and digital exposure. But what if this child safety narrative is just a big smokescreen? When analyzing the lines of these new regulations, it becomes clear that the social media ban might not just be a protective shield for the youth, but rather the initial phase of a much deeper and comprehensive surveillance project. The urgency to pass a social media ban raises a disturbing question about what is really being negotiated behind the scenes of the Capitol and Silicon Valley. The public is led to believe that this is the salvation of a generation, when, in reality, it could be the first step towards the end of internet anonymity. What is at stake goes beyond teenagers' screen time and strikes the foundation of digital freedom for all users. To understand the true impact and danger of this measure, it is necessary to look beyond the headlines and observe how society has already begun to react to this supposed government protection. Just observe online discussions to realize that society's reaction reveals a profound conflict. Initially, the idea of a social media ban seemed to have the support of the majority of American parents. However, as the practical details began to make headlines, the conversation quickly changed direction. First Amendment defenders that implementing a social media ban requires extremely invasive verification methods. In practice, the only way to guarantee a user's age is by requiring the upload of an official document, such as a driver's license. It is exactly at this point that the illusion of safety completely crumbles. For the adult citizen, the measure loses its heroic aura of child protection and begins to sound like a government surveillance alarm. The debate over the social media ban turned into a direct discussion about the loss of digital autonomy and the end of anonymity. What is pushed as simple state care requires anyone to hand over highly sensitive data just to browse the web. In an American culture that historically values individual freedom, the social media ban is rapidly being decoded as a disguised intrusion. The real fear is not that a teenager goes without scrolling their feed daily. The true concern is that everyone ends up trapped in a digital ecosystem where every click is tied to a record traceable by intelligence agencies. This widespread feeling of suspicion surrounding the social media ban is not an unfounded exaggeration. When such a severe restriction is presented as the only solution to a complex problem, the modern public quickly raises a red flag and refuses blind submission. The imposition of limits always generates friction, especially when the true intentions do not seem so crystal clear. To understand why society instinctively rejects this official narrative of protection, one must look at behavioral sciences. The answer lies in the exact way the human mind processes the imposition of new rules when trust in authorities and the system is already completely shattered. When trust levels in government institutions and large corporations reach historic lows, any new rule imposed from the top down is immediately received with profound skepticism. In the United States, where the ghost of state surveillance and endless data leak scandals are still extremely alive in the collective memory, the imposition of a social media ban is definitely not naively interpreted as a simple public welfare policy. Behavioral psychology, through the concept of psychological reactance, explains that in scenarios of a strong breach of trust, the public develops an almost automatic rejection of official narratives that are perfectly packaged. Therefore, when congressmen and lawmakers present the social media ban as the ultimate salvation for youth mental health, the mind of the common citizen immediately triggers a defense mechanism in search of hidden intentions. The original child safety narrative is discarded and replaced by the clear perception of a very well-disguised social control. What happens in practice is that society begins to see the advancement of the social media not as a legitimate protection tool, but as a rigorous test of mass obedience. The logic that permeates the discussion on the streets and online forums is quite direct. If the state can use the unquestionable justification of protecting children to force identity verification of absolutely all internet users, what would prevent the expansion of this same monitoring structure to other aspects of civilian life in the future? The acceptance of the rules of a social media ban requires the population to swallow a very dangerous premise, yielding their historical right to digital privacy in exchange for a promise of security that no one can guarantee. For the American public, who has the cultural instinct to fiercely defend their freedoms against any excess of federal or state power, silently accepting a social media ban sounds like handing over the keys to their own autonomy. This behavior of widespread questioning is not an accidental paranoia, but rather a very well-founded behavioral response after decades of abuses and broken promises regarding privacy. With every new attempt to pass a social media ban, using parents' guilt and fear as weapons of persuasion, the population's alert level only increases. The perception consolidates the idea that the true utility of a social media ban is not to keep teenagers away from screens, but to condition adult behavior, accustoming an entire generation to accept surveillance as the new internet standard. This strong popular resistance gains an even deeper contour of revolt when the veil is lifted on the true architects of this change. The scenario becomes even more revolting when the population realizes the extent of the cynicism of the technological and political machinery that helped create this problem, and now wants to sell the solution. It is exactly at this point of indignation the true face of corporations and lawmakers is inevitably exposed. There is a profound and perverse irony when the same Silicon Valley giants that invested billions of dollars in neuroscience to addict users now sit in U.S. congressional hearings to discuss the parameters and rules of a social media ban. For over a decade, engineers and executives worked exhaustively to design recommendation algorithms, infinite scroll tactics, and perfectly calibrated notifications to hijack human attention, generating record profits through advertising sales. And authorities watched all of this closely, allowing the attention economy to thrive without any structural limits. Now, facing the mental health collapse of an entire generation, the very system that manufactured this mass digital dependence tries to present itself as the moral authority capable of solving it through the direct imposition of a social media ban. What makes this situation so revolting to the American public is not just the creation of the problem, but the absolute cynicism of using the crisis that the corporate ecosystem itself calls as the perfect justification to change the rules of the game. The implementation of a social media ban does not punish the business model of big tech platforms, nor alters the predatory way algorithms operate behind the scenes of the internet. On the contrary, the social media ban focuses exclusively on restricting access and regulating the user, demanding that the citizen proves who they are to have the right to access the online world. This systemic hypocrisy reveals that the apparent priority was never to dismantle the addiction machine, but rather to find an acceptable pretext to justify controlling who enters it. When official speeches promote the social media ban as the great cure for the ills of the modern internet, they conveniently ignore their own share of blame in creating this digital dystopia that imprisons today's teenagers. The narrative demands that society blindly trust the very architects of the chaos to build the new online security fortress, ignoring the evident conflict of interest. However, the price of this supposed security exacts an extremely high toll on the individual freedom of every connected citizen. And it is exactly by paying attention to the practical gears that will make a social media ban work in the routine of every American, the true impact of this silent alliance between government and big tech finally materializes. The great structural transformation lies not in the symbolic act of banning minors, but rather in the massive technological infrastructure that will be mandatorily required for this prohibition to get off the ground. For any version of a social media ban to actually get off the ground and be applied in practice, there is an unavoidable technological barrier that few people are discussing openly: mandatory age verification. The central thesis of this entire legislative maneuver is revealed when we carefully analyze the technical infrastructure required to prevent minors from accessing these platforms. After all, how can the system guarantee with absolute certainty that a user is 16 or 18 years old? The short and disturbing answer is that a social media ban requires the immediate end of internet anonymity. To comply with the new regulations strictly imposed by various American states, networks will no longer be able to rely on just a simple checkbox where the user types their birth year. Strict compliance with the law will require highly invasive tools, forcing citizens to send photos of their driver's license, their state ID, or even provide sensitive data directly linked to their social security number. This drastic and compulsory identification requirement turns the social media ban into a giant digital Trojan horse. What is being widely pushed by the media as a heroic crusade to save American youth from depression and chronic addiction is, in fact, the foundation of a vast behavioral database tied to real, verifiable identities. Besides the mandatory submission of government documents, many of the current proposals to enforce a social media ban openly suggest the use of biometrics and facial recognition, requiring users to scan their faces through their cell phone camera before obtaining authorization to access their own accounts. When American society, which historically is NSA surveillance and constant corporate data leaks, accepts this basic premise, it automatically normalizes the fact that browsing the web requires a stamped digital identity. The implementation of a social media ban psychologically conditions the population to passively give up privacy, trading the historical freedom to explore the network anonymously for a strictly controlled access permission. The most critical and silent point of this scenario is the creation of an extremely dangerous legal and technological precedent. If today the average American citizen needs to present their official ID simply to scroll through the Instagram feed, post on X, or watch online videos because of a social media ban, tomorrow this exact same uninterrupted tracking technology could be required to read news sites, access financial platforms, or participate in political discussion forums. Constant tracking consolidates itself as the new normal of civil society, and the democratic capacity to express divergent opinions without fear of corporate or state retaliation completely disappears. The smokescreen of child safety masks the true project, accustoming the public to continuous identification and relentless online monitoring. The ultimate danger lies not only in the rules of an app, but in the frightening legacy of this surveillance infrastructure. And it is the consolidation of this terrible digital trap that pushes us to the final and most urgent reflection on the true cost of this entire maneuver. Ultimately, when we analyze the true cost of this entire structure, we realize that the deepest fear is not, by a long shot, going without scrolling an app screen on a cell phone. The ultimate danger behind the approval of a social media ban is our silent acceptance that the language of care and protection can be constantly used as a tool to expand digital control. Whenever society makes small exceptions to its individual freedoms in the name of absolute security, it invariably makes room for much larger and irreversible changes. A social media ban may even start with the noble justification of focusing exclusively on vulnerable youth. But the massive surveillance infrastructure, the demand for government IDs, and the definitive breach of anonymity will remain active, ready to be used against any American citizen in the future. If we allow moral panic to validate a social media ban by overriding basic privacy principles, we will be voluntarily building the walls of our own digital prison. Therefore, before blindly applauding the next headline about how politicians and tech giants are saving children through a social media ban, ask yourself what the true slice of your freedom they are demanding in return is. If this analysis helped you see the dark lines of this narrative, leave your comment below about this loss of privacy. Subscribe to the channel to support more investigations, and share this video with those who also need to understand what is at stake.